Welcome to the Oral Language in Early Learning and Childcare training video. This video sits as part of the training videos in the series for taking a developmental approach to emerging literacy across early learning and childcare. In this video, we will explore what oral language is, why it's important to children's literacy, language and communication development, and how you can plan for children's oral language development through developmentally appropriate play experiences where adults and children play and talk together. There are two elements to consider when reflecting on our provision in early learning and childcare. The first is around the quality of our adult-child interactions. Separate to this training are our Words Up Early Interaction Key Messages. The Words Up Early Interaction Key Messages have been developed to support quality adult-child interactions in the home environment and in early learning and childcare settings and schools. The second element that we consider is the quality of our learning environment and how our learning environment supports children's development. Seeing these two elements woven together, we need to reflect how our adult-child interactions support children's development within our learning environment. This slide shows the key components that underpin children's literacy, language and communication development. In focusing on quality adult-child interactions and planning for our learning environment, we can support the development of these emerging literacy key components through developmentally appropriate play experiences. We know that from the research that the more established these key components are, the more benefit children will get from formal instruction of reading and writing in school. Today we are going to focus on one of these key elements, oral language. Oral language is the ability to understand language and use language to communicate. It's important to children's literacy, language and communication skills, as children's oral language skills underpin their ability to communicate, to comprehend and to create texts. The Words Up Early Interaction Key Messages detail what we can do as practitioners to support children's language development. The Words Up Early Interaction Key Messages sit alongside the guidance in this video on oral language development. This training video is going to explore two areas that early years practitioners can focus on when supporting children's oral language in early learning and childcare settings, both indoors and outdoors. One of these elements is going to be around about modelling vocabulary across all of the areas of the setting, and the other is going to be around about retelling the same story a number of times during the week. The understanding and expression columns within the preschool developmental overviews identify the typical stage of language development. The strengths and areas for development identified from the preschool developmental overviews can be used by early years practitioners to support children's oral language development through adults and children playing and talking together. The first part of this training is going to explore an approach to supporting children's vocabulary development across the early learning and childcare setting. Prior to accessing this training, you should have accessed a selection of words, and each person should have the new word and the associated definition. You're going to take it in turns to spend a couple of minutes to teach one another your new word. When teaching your new words, you can use any strategies that you can think of. The only things that you're not allowed to do is to write your word down or to show the other people the slip of paper with the definition. Once you've taught your new word, spend a few minutes discussing what types of information did you provide when teaching this new word. You should now pause the video. When teaching your new words, some of the things you might have done is you may have given the definition for the word. You may have used the word within a sentence. You might have repeated the word a number of times and got the people you were teaching the new word to repeat it back. You may have drawn a picture that maybe represented or was associated with the word. And you may have clapped out the syllables in the words so that you could hear the individual beats. In supporting children's vocabulary development, we need to be mindful of the three things which children need simultaneously when learning new vocabulary. We need to think around about the experiences that the children will have in order for them to experience the new vocabulary in context. We need to think around about our role as adults in terms of modelling and telling them the words. And we also need to think around about the repetition, thinking about the number of repeated exposures children will have to that new vocabulary. In taking a developmental approach to literacy, language and communication, it is recommended that early learning and childcare settings and schools identify an approach to vocabulary instruction. In this video, we are going to explore some of the principles of pre-teaching vocabulary, a vocabulary programme created by speech and language therapist Pip St. John. You can find out more about pre-teaching vocabulary as a whole school approach to vocabulary development by clicking the link on the page where you accessed this video. In planning for vocabulary development in early learning and childcare settings, there are 3 steps that we can consider when engaging with the principles of pre-teaching vocabulary. The first step is to identify the vocabulary from the context. When planning for the context of learning, it is recommended that practitioners write down all of the vocabulary which they expect the children will encompass through the context of learning. In the example on the slide, the children have had an interest in dinosaurs. Through planning, the early years practitioners have identified a number of different words that they would anticipate the children may come across through the context of dinosaurs. Some of these words are words that most of the children will know already. Some of those words are words that would help enrich children's spoken language, and some of those words are subject specific to the context of dinosaurs. After writing down all of the words associated with the context of learning, the next step is to organise the words using the tiered approach to vocabulary. In pre-teaching vocabulary, there are 3 levels of words known as tiers that support practitioners through their planning of vocabulary instruction. Tier 1 words, or anchor words, are the words from the context which most children will already have as part of their understanding and expressive language. At the right-hand side, we have the Tier 3 words, or the step-on words. Those are the words that are often subject-specific vocabulary to the context of learning. In the middle, we have what pre-teaching vocabulary refers to as Tier 2, or the Goldilocks words. These are the words from the context which can be transferred across a number of different contexts. The Tier 2 vocabulary is the vocabulary that the pre-teaching vocabulary approach suggests we should focus on as practitioners in terms of our planning. On this slide, the practitioners have taken the vocabulary from the first step and they've organised the vocabulary using the tiered approach to vocabulary instruction. At the left-hand side, in the Tier 1 column, are the words that the practitioners have evaluated that they think most children will have already before the context of learning. For some children, they will not have the Tier 1 vocabulary as part of their understanding and expressive language. For those children, practitioners should consider the opportunities where adults and children can play and talk together to develop their understanding of Tier 1 vocabulary. At the right-hand side, we have the Tier 3 vocabulary. This is the vocabulary that the practitioners have evaluated is specific or specialist to the context of dinosaurs. Whilst this vocabulary may be explored through the context, the research that underpins the approach to pre-teaching vocabulary suggests that our main focus should be around the Tier 2 vocabulary. The Tier 2 vocabulary in the middle, or the Goldilocks words, are the words that practitioners have evaluated will enrich children's language. This is the vocabulary that the practitioners will focus on through planning for play both indoors and outdoors. Step 3 is then to plan for vocabulary instruction using your Tier 2 vocabulary. On the picture on the left-hand side, practitioners have identified the opportunities for adults to play and talk together where they can model this new language in context. When planning for the environment, practitioners can identify opportunities where the new vocabulary would be contextually relevant for the children. Through their adult-child interactions, adults can then identify opportunities to model the new vocabulary in context when playing and talking together with children. On the picture on the right-hand side, you can see some evaluations that practitioners have made in terms of opportunities to identify the vocabulary and any specific notes that they've made around about the Tier 2 vocabulary for that context. For this activity, we're going to put our pre-teaching vocabulary 3 that we've just been exploring into practice. We'd like you to firstly think around about a context of learning that you're currently looking at or you're about to explore. Using the 3-stepped approach to pre-teaching vocabulary planning, we'd like you to firstly identify a list of words linked to that context of learning. After you've identified your list of words, you should then use the pre-teaching vocabulary approach to divide your words into your 3 categories. The categories are based on the children that you're working with in your setting. There will not be a one-size-fits-all approach to whether these words should be in Tier 1, Tier 2 or Tier 3. When planning for tiered vocabulary instruction, we should firstly consider children's previous experiences. After you've identified your tiered list of words, I'd like to focus on your Tier 2 vocabulary and identify opportunities within your planning for adults and children to play and talk together and think around about developmentally appropriate play experiences that would provide opportunities for adults to model the language in context. You should now pause the video. Another way we can support children's oral language development is through planning for opportunities to provide repeated exposures to stories to children. The Sharing Stories guidance that's on the screen provides key messages for early years practitioners to focus on when sharing stories with children. One of the key messages is around about planning for repeated exposure to a story at least 3 times during the week. This is to support children's familiarisation of a text, building children's skills to be able to retell texts. In developing a story of the week, practitioners can also use the likes of props, visuals and gestures to support the development of the story. Through providing opportunities for children to have repeated exposures to text, and planning for the appropriate use of the likes of gestures and visuals when engaging with the text, children can develop their understanding of the narrative concepts of texts, such as who's in the text, where is it taking place, when is it taking place, and what's happening. In planning for opportunities for children to engage with the same text over a number of days through the week, practitioners are identifying opportunities to support children's sequencing skills through repetition of the story. Providing children with props linked to the story of the week is one way for planning for play linked to the text. This is an opportunity where adults and children could play and talk together, where adults could model new language in context and to support children's retelling skills. Reflecting on the Sharing Stories key messages, in what ways could you support children's language development through planning for Story of the Week? You should now pause the video. You have now reached the end of the Oral Language in Early Learning and Childcare training video.